everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local art scene. We have a different guest on each week. We play local, unsigned and independent music. We head over to the Ryelight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. And we catch up with Twangling Jack forward towards the end of the show for a weekly album review. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain @wickhamsound.org.uk. And I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, anyone with MP3s they'd like to send in, anyone with stories to share, anyone who thinks they'd make a good guest. Don't hesitate to get in touch with me. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We're repeated on Monday nights on Wickham Sound or on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, and we're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So this week we are going to be chatting to author A.B. Frank, and he has been kind enough to send us, well, he recorded this for his own podcast that he has, but he's got some flash fiction / short stories to share, and yeah, this is our trip to the Ryelight Zone courtesy of A.B. Frank.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Flash Fiction Friday with A.B. Frank. If you've not joined my newsletter, then there's a link below to sign up to that. I'm not going to be sending loads and loads of emails. I'll send the odd article and an interesting thing that I've written, but also it's a way for me to stay in touch with you, so if something were to happen to YouTube, then I can still contact you and update you with the stuff that's going on. You'll also get every episode of Flash Fiction Friday sent via email, an audio, and the written version of it. So the link to the newsletter is down below. And so this week I've gone for the sci-fi horror genre, but this is also sort of the weird fiction genre as well, I think. And on random word generator, the object that I generated, or the noun, was bath, and the action, or the verb that I generated, was mutation. And the story that I wrote, titled Nuzzled, is as follows. The gas streetlight shone a small yellow pool onto the pavement and into the road just outside my building. I passed beneath it when I heard the animal whining in the shadows. It was wrapped in a filthy sheet and left on the side of the road. I moved the sheet around to release it. The head protruded from an opening to reveal a beast never seen by civilized man before, a beast whose origin will remain unknown forever. More of the sheet fell away to show me that it had no fur. Its black flesh had angry purple, red blotches. The eyes were bloodshot, and the teeth were visible along the short snout. Before I had the chance or time to flee from its presence, it nuzzled my palm. I wrapped it back up and hurried into my building with it in my arms. A lapse in judgment on my part. I gave it a warm bath. When the water touched it, that's when the mutation started. Teeth and claws grew, but most worryingly, its entire body also increased in size fourfold. I backed away as its mass expanded through the sides of the bath and sent water across the floor. It hadn't adjusted to its growth and looked awkward as it limped towards me, my back against the wall. It lay beside me and nuzzled my calf like a cat. Gingerly, I stroked the top of its head. This was 3 hours ago, and I dare not move. The end. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Flash Fiction Friday with A.B. Frank. Now, before we get into this episode, I just wanted to remind you all that you can get Flash Fiction Friday with A.B. Frank on any podcast provider. So go to whatever podcast provider you use and search for the show. I'll also be putting a link to my email list down below. So if you want to join the list, there's a few benefits. The link will take you to a page explaining some of those benefits. I'm not going to bore you with them here. I'm not going to pressure you into joining it. If you want to join it, then you'll get some benefits and there'll be opportunities that I'll be sharing with the email list exclusively in the future. So go and check that out if you feel like it. But anyway, this episode, I've chose the horror genre. The object or the noun that I generated is restaurant, and the action or the verb that I generated was distinguish. So we've got horror, restaurant, and distinguish. And the story that I wrote, as always, 250 words, give or take 10%, is titled, They Descend Upon Me. Enjoy. They are coming for me. No longer can I distinguish between those who I can trust and those I cannot. I turn into the restaurant and am greeted by the clank of cutlery and the aroma of food. I glance back out into the street to see if they have caught up. Then the waiter seats me at a table. In the restaurant, I hope to be out of their reach, though their people are everywhere. I scan the room. A couple sips wine. A cellist plays in the corner, and a waiter takes an order. "Would you like to order a drink while you read the menu, sir?" said the waiter who had seated me. "Whiskey," I say, and fix my attention on the entrance. Conversations carry on while I remain anonymous. Then I wonder if they might enter through the back and my gaze darts between the entrance and the kitchen door. A woman laughs behind me. A man lights a cigar. "Here you are, sir." The waiter hands me my whiskey and I drain it. It takes not but a moment for the paralysing agent to take effect. The cellist stops. Talking stops. The sound of cutlery is silent. Before I am unable to move entirely, I look at the waiter, accusing. He's already looking at me. Everyone else turns to look at me. At once their faces warp into that unbearable grin that they wear. With their arms outstretched, they descend upon me. The end.
Big thank you to AB Frank for this week's entry into the Ryelight Zone. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Seeds of Hope by Maz Manzini.
Train is coming over the hill, compelled down the rail track by our children's will, trekking through the dust bowl, coming down the line. The train is coming, but it takes time. The train is rattling down the dusty track, platform filling slowly, daylight fades to black, bridging over rivers, cutting through the woods. The train is coming as it should. Let them breathe, let them grow, these seeds of hope. Let them breathe, let them grow, these seeds of hope. These seeds of hope. Train is coming, kicking up the sand, to take all the children off to slumberland. Freddie, little Jonah, Bo and Nancy Ray. It's time to go now, it can't stay. Let them breathe, let them go. Let them breathe, let them grow, these seeds of hope. These seeds of hope. Train is coming over the hill, down through New Mexico. It's coming still. Pulling an ETNO, lifting off the earth, steaming through the sky for all she's worth. Train is whistling, whistling through the clouds, treetop kissing, cargo sleeping sound, wheeling round the hillside, landing on the tracks. Listen for the train, she's coming back. Let it breathe, let it grow, these seeds of hope. Let it breathe, let it grow, these seeds of hope. Let it breathe, let it grow.
and try to stay on course. Keep up the fight and show no remorse. Don't lose hope, hope is your power and your source. Just because I'm strong enough to handle some pain doesn't mean I deserve it in any way. I'll keep fighting and give it all that it takes to never to allow defeat to show on my face. Fight back, I stand fight back. Always stay on the attack. So fight back, I stand fight back. Always stay on the attack. So fight back. You're not completely broken to the core. All this pain inside that you keep in store. You know what is the means and what is the cause. It's time to open your mouth and bear your claws. Just because I'm strong enough to handle some pain doesn't mean I deserve it in any way. I'll keep fighting and give it all that it takes to never to allow defeat to show on my face. Fight back, I stand fight back. Always stay on the attack. So fight back, I stand fight back. Always stay on the attack. So fight back. In life, when something bad happens, you can choose to let it define you. You can choose to let it destroy you. But one thing you must ensure, you must choose to track down the cure. Fight back, I stand fight back. Always stay on the attack. So fight back, I stand fight back. Always stay on the attack. So fight back.
That was Biting Back by Humans Can't Reboot, and before that we had Seeds of Hope by Maz Manzini. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and I'm joined now for this week's interview by author A.B. Frank. So the first question is a question I ask everybody, which is, what was the last book that you read and what did you think of it?
The last book I read was a book called A Song for the Void, and it was really good. Yeah, it's set in the 1800s, 1853, I think. The South China Sea, the Opium Wars. Mm-hmm. It's a gas lamp horror. It's weird fiction, cosmic horror, something in the sky. Yeah, I really liked it. I don't know how long you want this answer to be for this first question, but no, it's weird. Inspired by Lovecraft, definitely. Yeah, weird cosmic horror. Gets progressively, more sinister, and it goes off. Awesome. Yeah, I liked it.
Cool, sounds good. And that's kind of led me really nicely onto my second question, which is, how would you describe gas lamp fiction, and what are some of your favourite examples?
It's basically a cross between historical fiction and horror, or fantasy, or crime even. Yeah. However, I always say like Dracula's an example of it, but at the time Dracula wasn't historical fiction; it was just fiction. It was of the present day, and the current technology at the time. But yeah, modern examples or more modern examples. Laura Purcell, I always cite. The Silent Companions, Bone China are two books I've read by her. You've got The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. So that sort of thing. The horse and carriage, candelabras, Gothic, that type of wood panelled libraries, stuff like that. That awesome. Sort of visual scenery.
And what was it that got you into reading that kind of stuff?
I guess I kind of always liked it. I've seen a few Sherlock Holmes films over the years and liked that. But then there's a book I've got just up here called The Binding by Bridget Collins, which is loosely set in that area, that era. And I know it's set in that era because she said in an interview, but it's not very clear. But just the descriptions and the atmospheric descriptions and the stuff that's there, the things, the items that are being described, the setting, that sort of book I was really like, this is what I seem to enjoy. That was when the penny dropped about 2 or 3 years ago, whenever that book came out. I was like, that's the thing what I like.
Yeah, and your own writing kind of reflects that as well. I mean, I was going to ask whether it was like a conscious choice for you to go into writing Gaslamp, but I mean, I guess it makes sense, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was writing sort of bits and pieces that weren't Gaslamp horror or Gaslamp fantasy, but then getting more and more into it and watching more and more things like The Alienist on Netflix, at Carnival Row on Amazon Prime, and reading more and more books that are set in that time and follow those themes, just set me up nicely. Yeah.
Cool. And what are some of the challenges of doing that? Like, do you have to carry out a lot of research, or is it, I mean, I suppose to a certain extent you're kind of so steeped in Gaslamp stuff that you know what technologies were around, and also, I suppose with Gaslamp, there is a little bit of leeway as well to be a bit more inventive. And I mean, we talked when me and you talked last about having like an alternative London as well, so you can kind of be a bit fast and loose with things. But how much research do you need to do?
Yeah, I mean, some stuff I'd like you say, like just from my own consuming of that genre, I just can write and I'm like, oh, I best check that just to make sure, because it's just come off the top of my head. But like Google if I need anything really quick, like dates that things were invented, just to make sure that I can include it in a certain story. But yeah, I've got a bunch of books that you can't see here, like behind the chair, and that are more for research purposes. Yeah, I've got some book about Manchester crime gangs and stuff like that from that era. They've got a book called The Building of Victorian Salford, which is where I live until Thursday when I move house. Yeah. Just stuff like that. The different things about that period in time. I've got a folio society just on the top shelves there. A 3-book thingy in the slipcase by the Folio Society called the Victorian Trilogy, like Victorian people, Victorian places, Victorian things. I think the 3 are. Yeah. Which is illustrated in really nice quality, but also has some great information in there. So things like that make a nice reference when you're writing a story. Yeah.
And this wasn't a question I was planning on asking, but I've just thought I saw a guy the other day. There was a news article about him because he's living as though he was in like 1850 or whatever. Have you ever considered doing that?
Yes, I've seen him. No, I've not considered doing it myself, but I have seen that guy. He's young, isn't he? He's like 30.
Yeah, I think he's younger than that. I'm sure he was like 22 or something. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And he said that people say to him like he's the oldest young person they know, and he was like, "Yeah, I agree with that."
Yeah, I've seen him getting up in all the clobber. Yeah, the hat and the pocket watch and stuff like that. Yeah, I've seen him.
Yeah. Well, because I can imagine as well, you mentioning you're moving house soon. I mean, are you tempted to kit it out with like all Victorian antiques and steampunky gadgets and all of this stuff?
Only the library reading room office, whatever room that I'm going to call that. That's going to look different to the rest of the house behind a sealed door.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that makes sense, to be fair, because you don't want it to take over as well. But okay, cool. So I wanted to chat to you as well. Obviously, how I know you is through YouTube. So I wondered, how long have you been making YouTube videos, and what attracted you to join the community?
I think I started like around the time of lockdown. Maybe it was just prior to lockdown, early 2020. So just over 2 years now. And I wasn't trying to be a booktuber. I was going to start a podcast about bookshops and things like that. I did start interviewing booksellers and went to a bunch of book festivals and stuff like that. That was like the end of 2019. And then by March, we were in lockdown in 2020. So I was like, well, I might have to get on camera here. It was accidental, really, but just thought we were nowhere's open. So I had no experience really of doing interviews over Zoom. I was preferred going to the places and doing face-to-face stuff. So just thought I'll just do videos instead. Yeah, and sort of make do with what you have as on hand, I suppose. Yeah. And you mentioned there as well, like doing things like podcasts. And recently you started up your podcast series with your
You've got different flash fiction that you've been contributing, and you've been looking at getting some authors in as well. So that's why we chatted last as well, so that people who don't know that are aware. But how long have you been doing that, and like what's the plan for those going forward?
Well, I've not really written much flash fiction, but I knew how to do it. I picked up bits of theory here and there, so I started it like 2 months ago, and I think we're 8 episodes in. Then I think you're episode 8, which goes out. Will be out by the time people are seeing this. So, what's the question again, Sarah?
What's the goal? What direction are you hoping
Right.
to take
So,
it?
yeah, like we mentioned before, I've got this idea of like this alternative Victorian world that I'm setting a lot of my stories in, which have a few recurring characters and places and stuff like that. So some of these stories are featuring just little snippets of things that I'm thinking of at the minute. I'll use them to like see what works. Now I've actually got a little story written down of them, see what I can take forwards, and also stuff that I've already written that's not out just yet. Short stories and a novella, possibly a novel, which is, I don't know how long it's going to be by the time I finished it, but yes, some stuff that's in there I've sort of referenced it or will reference in these shorter pieces of flash fiction, just to refer people back to at some point, when these longer pieces do come out.
Yeah. And I mean, they're all really cool because you could even send them out to bloggers and things like that as well. And obviously you've got them on your own YouTube channel. And there's something in it that's, it's nice to hear an author read their own stories as well. I mean, so the hope would be people would maybe listen to those, and then when they do read your novel, they're kind of their like internal monologue will kind of be in your voice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not a qualified narrator. I mean, I've never done any training like that, but it's just a way to get my writing out there in a way that where I've not got to like go through the publishing process as well.
Yeah, cool, makes sense. And so, what's behind the decision to use A.B. Frank as a pen name?
They are my actual initials.
Yeah.
And Griffiths is my last name, which I just don't think's that catchy. I think A.B. Frank's a bit punchier. Looks a bit better.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, cool. And in your opinion, and I suppose mainly related to Gaslamp, but in fiction in general, what are some of like the essential ingredients of a good story?
I like when the atmosphere is captured of because we're setting things in a different time period. So I like when the atmosphere and that setting is captured, so you can visualize the things that are in a room at a given time in history. So I really like that about the Gaslamp in historical fiction in general, capturing a different time. You learn a lot of stuff when you read historical fiction of like the things that were about at that time, the terminology that was used. And like I remember reading Sherlock Holmes and seeing the phrase hansom cab, and I stuck a note in the book and said like, "What is this? Research this." When it's just a horse and carriage thing, isn't it? Taxi, basically, an early taxi. So capturing the just the setting of a given time in history, I really like.
Cool. And I mean, I suppose as well, especially when done well, historical fiction can do the same thing that contemporary fiction does in terms of like speaking to like a universal truth about what it is to be human, and capturing what it is to be in love, and all of these different bits that contemporary fiction does. So you can fit that in at the same time as you say, this sort of world building stuff where you're learning what it was like to be working class in 1880s Manchester or whatever it is. So you can kind of squeeze definitely more in.
Yeah, I mean, our story when I spoke to you on my on Flash Fiction Friday, the last line in that story, I mentioned like you're not going to stop me from being who I am, which is a very relevant line for today and for people today. But the city and this world that I'm building, people like there's magic and supernatural stuff in there, and there's a lot of prejudice towards that and a lot of fear towards that type of thing. Yeah. So it's referencing that, but it's also a very relevant point for today, and it has its applications in modern society.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with author A.B. Frank, and this is Twangling Jack Ford with One Man Freak Show.
When I'm feeling low, a one-man freak show. I could bring my ball if you'll let me join your team. I could make you laugh so you don't treat me mean. I was always the sort to avoid sport given any excuse. Always feeling out of place with the constant verbal abuse. You wonder why I am so hard to know. You wonder why I live my life like a one-man freak show. I could play guitar, I could buy a van and a PA system if you'd play in my band. Everything I've learned from life, all I've come to know, is how to be a performer in a one-man freak show. Yes, I've become a performer in a one-man freak show. You wonder why I can't just go with the flow. You wonder why I want to stay when you want to go. You wonder why I say goodbye when you say hello. You wonder why I let it die when you wanted it to grow. You wonder why I live my life like a one-man freak show.
That was One Man Freak Show by Twangling Jack Ford. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and I'm joined here in conversation by this week's guest, who is author A.B. Frank.
Awesome. So what are your kind of goals with publishing? So you mentioned, you've got your flash and you've got a novella and a novel that you don't know how long it's going to end up being. What's like your vision for all of that?
To be honest, I'm not too bothered about traditional publishing, getting an agent or anything like that. I don't really care. I will gladly do it myself. As long as I'm happy with it, as long as it's telling the story that I want to tell, then I'll just put it out there. That's fine by me. Yeah, it doesn't need to be traditionally published at all.
Cool. And is that like, I guess it's going to be an ongoing series really? Because as you say, you sort of got the same recurring characters and you've got the world itself. So I suppose there's quite a lot you can do there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's loads of applications that I've been thinking of. So I've written something that's around 21,000 words, which may end up being a novel. I don't actually know how long it's going to turn out to be. It might only be about 35,000, 40,000 words, but there's a character in that who I have mentioned in other stories, but isn't the focus of that story. He's just like he's on the periphery for most of it, and has a little bit of a a cool scene, but he's not the main character at all. It's a first person story told between two other characters, a first person, a woman, and then a constable who's looking for her. She's apparently a witch. So that's that prejudice again of the magic and stuff like that in this Victorian world.
Yeah, and I think, as we're saying, like it kind of reflects that the same prejudices we have today. It's that kind of the fear of the unknown or people who are different to us. So, you know, in your world, it's like, well, yeah, she might be a witch, whereas in ours, it might be, you know, oh, she might be transgender or something like that. But there's those parallels between what we see in our world and what's in yours, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm trying to make something that would apply to the modern world as well. So there's a bit of a connection there.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that kind of struck me there, especially with you not being too worried about going the traditional route, it kind of means when you're writing these stories, as you say, you don't know how long it's going to be, but it'll be as long as the story needs, rather than forcing you to add an extra 30,000 words just because that's what the publisher wants or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that would be probably the worst situation I could think of if I was trying to do something that I actually enjoy and that I'm doing off my own back, that going to someone to get like their approval and stuff like that, and say, oh, it needs this extra bit of stuff here, this you need to add another character so you can weave this thread into the plot. And it's just not like how the creative process works. If you're telling a story, then you're telling a story, and you don't want someone else. It's not a story told by committee, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, you see actually what happens when a story does get told by committee. I mean, I suppose like even like the last season of Game of Thrones is a great example of that, where it's like if you just left George R.R. Martin to do his thing, it might have taken him 20 years, but he probably would have done it better, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I've not watched the last series, to be honest. I stopped watching the series controversially after about series 4. I think there were 5 series out anyway, and I watched up to the point where Arya Stark says them that gibberish, and she has that coin, doesn't she? And she goes to that place to get trained.
Yeah.
I stopped watching soon after there. I just wasn't getting into it.
Yeah.
So I binged watched up to that point. I probably wouldn't have got that far if I was watching in real time.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That's probably the best place to stop anyway, or one of them. Okay, cool. So what can you tell us about your alternative London? You've told us a bit about like some of the magic that's going on and whatnot. But what sets it apart from our real London, and what have been some of the challenges of doing that?
Yeah, well, I'm still building it out, so there's a lot of stuff that I'm still to learn, which I'm excited about. And I'm writing a collection of stories that are set in this world, where I'm including a lot of like, it's going to be called, or the working title is In Plain Sight Unseen. So it's stuff that we would see in our everyday lives, but that are actual horrors, stuff like, you know, mental illness and psychopathy and revenge and things like that, where you can walk past someone who might be going to take revenge on someone and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So those sort of situations that I can see characters walking through, like the cobbled roads or the hard packed dirt roads, and you know, like foggy and smoggy from all the smoke from the chimneys and stuff like that. Just exploring how you know, how the society and the government that I'm going to be creating are telling people how they should, you know, conduct themselves and watch out at night and stuff like that. Just just the way all the moving parts are going to interact with each other.
And you used a really interesting word there, which was exploring. Like, does it feel to you as though you are exploring the streets of this alternative London and sort of seeing it for yourself as a visitor?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to try and plan it all prior to writing anything, I don't know if I'd ever get around to the writing part. So exploring it and then finding out, like, I'm more of a discovery writer. Like, I do plot my stories to a point, but just more like checkpoints that I want to hit along the way in a story. And then the finer details, like I don't know prior to writing them, they'll just come to me. It does mean that I've got a little bit more editing on the back end, but that's fine. Yeah, I'm writing a story now for our mutual friend Regina for the next anthology, and I took a piece out and changed who the victim was going to be at the end, the reveal, which meant I could take a big chunk out, and condense the story and make it just a little bit tighter and leaner and better, I think, because I was trying to cram a bit too much into the 5,000 word limit.
Cool. And I was going to ask you about so some of these anthologies. What are some of the other anthologies you've been publishing? I can't remember how many of them, because I know there's a few that have been around now.
That's the first one, Surf Cold, with Sweeping the Side Street. Yeah, that's the first one I've been published in. Yeah.
Cool. And so this will be like your follow-up. And again, I think that was a really interesting piece. I mean, because I like this idea. That almost comes back to what you're saying about these people that you'd almost walk past in the streets, and maybe not so much in our society now because we don't have chimney sweeps, but back then in, you know, the Victorian times, like, you know, those like maybe like urchins and orphans and all of these things, like these were just kids that people just like they almost didn't notice that they were there, you know, and that makes them for a really interesting character, I think.
Yeah, and there's a character in that story who's one of the recurring character who's gonna I'm like gonna work on and explore, like we said, and develop.
Yeah.
And who was the boy in the story that we did in Flash Fiction Friday. So yeah, I'm just exploring that sort of thing and getting to know them and how this character that I'm going to apply certain bits of supernatural to him and how he's going to navigate that world and that city.
Awesome. And who are some of the other indie authors whose work you admire?
Well, I've read a lot of yours.
Yeah, I was gonna say apart from me, because I can see them in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I've not read a ton of indie authors.
Yeah.
My reading has gone down drastically this year, or the last probably I'd say 8 months really, because I've been writing a bit more. So yeah, I don't think I've read many indie authors lately.
Yeah.
Or well, even I couldn't. Go on.
I was going to say, I suppose it's again with you preferring to read Gaslamp. I mean, it's not as though that's the only thing that you do read, but I suppose it then it almost makes it harder to discover indie authors, because like when I read indie authors, I'll read a little bit of everything, you know. So there's too many for me to choose from. Whereas if you were to look specifically for indie Gaslamp authors, I'm sure there are you know, there'll be a few, but it's going to be nowhere near as many as doing across like all of the genres, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've read like Cameron Chaney's book and stuff like that. I was thinking specifically about Gaslamp, you know, that sort of time period.
Yeah.
Which, come to think of it, I'm currently reading. What's his name? Michael Israel Jarvis. Is that the right way around?
Yeah.
Osric Fingerbone and the Boy Murderer.
Yeah.
Book 1 in that series. So I think I'm about a quarter of the way through that.
Oh, awesome! Well,
so that's indie published, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's been a previous guest on the show as well. At least I think he has. He must have been, because he's one of the people who I'd go to and be like, "Hey, can you do me a favor and come and chat to me for my radio show?" But yeah, that's a good shout, because that is very much a similar thing, that kind of Gaslamp sort of steampunky vibe. Because he's done some like real traditional sort of sword and sorcery fantasy as well, which is probably sort of less up your tree than the Osric books, because those really are again that kind of Gaslamp style.
Yeah, reminding me of a bit like Sherlock.
Yeah,
but there's like this creeping bit of magic that I think is coming into it. I've not got that far yet.
Yeah, well, I'll give you no spoilers. Cool. Okay, I think that's about pretty much it. There are only a couple of other questions that I wanted to get to ask. So we've kind of covered what's next for you, really. So I guess, like, where's the best place for people to go and find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, I mean, Flash Fiction Friday is a podcast, and I put all the episodes up on, and I narrate them myself on AB Frank on YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at @_AB Frank. If you want to join the newsletter, I send the written version and the narrated version via email every Friday of Flash Fiction Friday. And when you join that, you get a free story straight away sent to you, a free short story. Cool. So yeah, if you want to join that, I'll send a bunch of like updates prior to telling anybody else through the newsletter as well.
Cool. And are you looking for other people to potentially join you for Flash Fiction Friday?
Yes, yeah, we'll hope to invite a few authors on over time, like similar format to how we did it.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Cool. So probably best bet, give you a follow on YouTube, comment on some of your videos, and they can go from there.
Big thank you to AB Frank for joining me. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is Don't Care Anymore by Tom Bradley Jr.
Take me far away from here. You have no reason to fear. Oh, I hope you come along and see your right from wrong, but you don't really care anymore. I'm watching our past from my window, and the time I went and broke my left elbow. Oh, I screamed, I shouted and cried, left a hole deep inside, but you with the wind. Oh, da 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 da. So take in every word of this song. My love is still strong, and when you're gone, oh, remember all those times and 13 reasons why our love will go on forevermore. But you still don't care anymore. Oh, our love will go on forevermore. But you still don't care anymore.
Agatha Christie came to tea. When she knocked on the door and asked for me. When she arrived at 3:10. When already told you 3:10. When
That was Agatha Christie by Occasionally David, and before that we had Don't Care Anymore by Tom Bradley Jr. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and we're going to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
The White Room, the KLF. In the late 80s, some friends and I had a small studio where we worked on ideas to impress friends of friends. People like the makers of Max Headroom and the man that fooled the world with the Roswell hoax. One of these associates in our orbit asked us to come up with ideas for themes for a Doctor Who movie. We came up with a few ideas, and as a joke we played the theme from the Doctor Who TV show to a 6/8 Gary Glitter drum pattern. Soon after this, an act called the Time Lords had a #1 hit with exactly the same idea, but with a vocal shouting Doctor Who in the way that Gary Glitter shouted rock and roll on his hit. I'm not saying it should have been me, I'm saying it could have been me. The Time Lords used this success to produce some iconic dance records that defined the era. They would be on MTV, a whole bunch of them, standing on risers to make a pyramid, dancers, a rapper, African tribesmen, guitarists with guitars shooting out fireworks and sparkling angle grinders. On occasions they would all shout and point. Electronic beeps, grunts and stabs swirled in cavernous echo. Soul singers would sing words that meant almost nothing apart from being the name of the band, the other name of the band and the song's title. There was always a lot of sampled crowd noise. It was spectacular to the extreme. The music was a mixture of all the dance styles of the moment, house, techno, and some a bit soul to soul-y, with the big pads and the piano chops that became the sound of the 90s, and the production was huge. There would be versions of these songs with different samples and strings and chorus ideas taken from film themes and musical theatre. It was the music of glow sticks and smiley face t-shirts for those who were sorted for ease and whiz. It was spectacular fun, and you were never sure that the whole thing was not just a big joke that we were all in on. In 1991, KLF were massive music stars, but in 1992, as conceptual artists, they announced their retirement from music, and soon after that they deleted their whole catalogue. So it was lucky that I found their CD in a charity shop. The album contains versions of 2 dance tracks, 3am Eternal and What Time Is Love, that were to form the basis of their hit singles and remixes. And it has a version of the song Justified and Ancient, a version of which became a hit when they unexpectedly got country music star Tammy Stand By Your Man Wynette to sing it for them. I say unexpectedly, but unexpectedly was how they operated. The album also has country steel guitar in a Twin Peaks type soundscape narrated in a Scottish accent, and there is plenty of deep pulsing synth bass. Motown oohs keep appearing in the introduction to the songs, like the tracks of My Tears, or is that just my imagination? Catchy choruses abound with biddly biddly dub toast scat singing. KLF were actually a duo who had called themselves the Justified Ancients of Moo, a concept they took from the Illuminatus trilogy, a satirical postmodern sci-fi adventure story written by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. This was abbreviated to Jams, by which name they had a hit with a dance song that amusingly just listed northern town names called It's Grim Up North. They are also famous for a number of stunts, such as awarding a prize for the worst artist. Their most famous work of art was the burning of £1 million, and it was after that that they deleted everything for 23 years. But it is now available, so you can check it out on Spotify and stuff. The White Room, the KLF.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to AB Frank for joining me. Thank you to everyone whose music I've played. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We're repeating on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to get in touch with me here at the studio, you can drop me an email on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk, which is dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, all of that good stuff, anyone with MP3s. So, with that said, I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is from previous guests, Sloth in the City. This is Mother's Prayer. I'll chat to you next week.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh no, oh no, oh yes, yes. Oh no, oh yes, oh no, oh yes, I've been gone. A tip-top, a tip-top, that's how I'm feeling right now. Tip-a-topper, a tip-a-topper, a tip-a-topper, a tip-a-topper.